What God has done with my pain.
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 To what God has done with my pain. Another amazing interviewee with us today. I have Candace. Candace is a friend of Stacy, and we had Stacy here a few episodes ago, and hers was a two-parter. So Stacy had so much to share with us, so much to give us, so much about God's love and testimony of what He can do with pain. So, with that being said, Candace, welcome. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to speak about my favorite person in the whole world, God. He's done, and I just have so much joy that He's filled me with, and I really just want to touch the hearts of others, or have Him use me to touch the hearts of others.
Amazing. I love that. I love that. I was gonna ask, you right now you live in Fayetteville, correct?
Yes.
Wow. And have you always lived in Fayetteville? I think you mentioned on the phone that you grew up or you were from California before.
I'm from Utah.
Mm.
I'm born and raised in Utah, and then I did live in California for some time. Went back to Utah, and now I'm here in North Carolina.
Oh, wow. So talk to me about that. What was that like going from Utah to California, back to Utah to here?
That's my whole testimony.
Oh, perfect.
We're ready to dive right in.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, let's start at Utah and your childhood.
Okay. So, my childhood, I grew up in just an average family. I grew up Mormon also. I feel like that's going to be a big part of the conversation. A lot of my childhood, I think right now, God is starting to heal me from that, or He's starting now to kind of bring a lot of that stuff to light that you don't really, because if I just look at my childhood right now, it kind of just seems so normal. But some things here and there lately have been resurfacing. I had a great childhood for my most part. There were some bad times that I'm learning. I was doing a small group the beginning of this year, maybe the end of last year, with my friends, and we were doing a book called Forgiving What You Can't Forget, the Lisa Turkhurst book. Wow. And she walked through in her book some things, how to bring things out of your childhood, and it made me realize long ago there was a moment when I was little, I was in a closet with somebody older than me, and it was like a sexual interaction. So that's fairly new that God is uncovering now. But as far as Utah to California to North Carolina, I kind of would rather just share that first, because that's where the start of my faith happened, and then what God is revealing to me about.
Absolutely.
I was married. I'm on my second marriage right now, and my first marriage, I'm going to try really hard not to share their names. My first marriage, he and I were both from Utah. He enlisted in the Marine Corps. That's how I ended up in California. We did kind of a courthouse marriage. And before we were married, there were some flops and failures in our relationship. And I should have taken those red flags. But, when you're so young and naive, like, you see right past them. So I moved to California, and it wasn't until I was in California till things started to spiral downward. And I was probably 21 years old when I moved there. And our marriage, I want to share how bad it was, but it's kind of hard to share it the way I would share it when I first started stepping in faith, because I don't see myself as the only victim anymore in that marriage. So I do want to preface that he is not as evil as I'm about to make him sound, but I have to share that perspective to really show the growth in my faith. So in my marriage, it was very ugly. There was cheating. There was lying, there was verbal abuse, mental abuse. And I always thought that he was the one who was the most abusive, but obviously no sin is greater than another's. And he would physically, well, he would do it in a sense where he would get really close in my face and scream at me. But because he was in the Marine Corps, he wouldn't get too physical because repercussions. But mentally and emotionally, that manipulation and control was there a lot of the time. I did it back to him in the sense where whenever he was treating me poorly, I would then say, "You're not a man. Real men don't do this." And that is also, verbal abuse. And I've learned that. But he was very sexually abusive. I didn't realize how sexually abusive he was. Now that I am in a healthy marriage and I understand that sex is meant to be a joyful thing, it was not a joyful thing in that marriage. And really when it started going downward is when he wanted to start having, how do I say this? When his sexual fantasies were starting to get involved in our conversations.
Yeah.
So once we were in California, we are in the middle of the desert, 29 Palms, California. Have you heard of it?
I have not. No.
Okay. It's kind of near Joshua Tree National Park. So out there is nothing. It's like the middle of nowhere, very secluded. When I first moved there, I cried for a few weeks because you're like, where am I?
Yeah, it's so different from Utah, I can imagine.
Yes. And when I was there, once I was away from all my family and friends, his sexual desire started to surface. And for months on end, the biggest one that really started this whole journey for me was he wanted to see me have intercourse with another male in front of him. And for months on end, he kind of pestered me about it. And usually when you are in a very toxic, narcissistic marriage, and also I know narcissism is tossed around a lot now in today's time, but 8 years ago, it wasn't as big as it was. So it was truly a narcissistic relationship. He's had a lot of past hurt in his life. He's lost both of his parents. I personally believe that he was maybe sexually abused in his past, which is why he was so, why sex wasn't a big thing in his priorities. So when he brought this first to the table, I was kind of stunned because my parents raised me. My mom taught me, traditional values when it comes to intercourse with a male. And I wasn't about that. I didn't want to include other people, other things. It wasn't in my playbook, but he brought those things out. And I would tell him for months, no, I don't want to do that. But ultimately it led to bigger and bigger fights. So finally, after 3 months, I said, okay, fine, we'll do this. And he said, okay, I need you to pick somebody from your work, just someone random. And I worked at the Starbucks on the Marine Corps base. And so it's filled with only Marines. It's the only Starbucks, probably for 45 minutes to an hour away. Yeah. The only people who have access to it is people who have base access. So I saw the same people every day. So I did what he said, and I invited a man, and I invited him to a house party. So I didn't just flat out say, hey, you want to do this? I just said, hey, we're having a house party. Do you want to come? And he was kind of caught off guard a little bit because that's weird. Why is a married woman inviting me? But okay. Yeah. So he came, and it's because my husband wanted to see if he was okay, if he was safe, or if he was clean. And so we had the party. And after he left, my husband was so upset that he ultimately said, you invited him because you're already having sex with him. And it started, so that then became a new fight. And it was like my phone became an electronic leash. I was accused of doing things, and it wasn't happening. And it feels like when you're in a marriage, I do want to kind of go into my marriage because that's what led up to this point. Is I feel that anytime he did something wrong, he would find something to make it seem like I did something worse. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that would be the topic of any kind of argument. He picked up a mirror once and he slammed it on my feet and it shattered in an argument. He would go places without telling me. We were so broken. I would get so drunk. I used to be a heavy drinker in this marriage. I would just chug and chug and chug on the weekends. All I wanted to do was party. And when I would do that, we would always fight. And I would scream at him, "I hate you. I hope you die." And that really showed where my heart was at the time in the marriage. But it's like, you're so broken. You definitely don't want to share your brokenness with the other Marine Corps wives, especially because I was surrounded by 18, 19-year-old wives. And I didn't want to tell my parents about this, this, I want to say threesome because it wouldn't be a threesome, but about what was going on, because we were really fighting about this. And he was really saying I had cheated on him already with this man. And I had never taken a second look at another man until this situation happened, because my dad had an affair when I was younger. So seeing that, and then seeing my mom and stepdad, sorry, I'm like skipping. I know you asked about my past, but
you're absolutely fine. No, you're absolutely fine.
Mom and dad never got married, but seeing my mom and stepdad together ever since I was 2 versus my dad having an affair. And this is no knock to my dad, so if you're watching it, Dad, I love you. But I saw what I didn't want in a marriage versus what I did want. And so the last thing I wanted was people to think that I was cheating on my husband,
Yeah.
And he would broadcast it. We'd put everything on Facebook, on social media. 29 Palms had this Snapchat called 29 Snaps, where people could send in videos or pictures to the 29 Snaps, and whoever was the admin, they were, what's the word? Anonymous. It was an anonymous admin. Nobody knew who ran the Snapchat, but they would repost everything. And so he kind of would put that out there about me, and so I didn't want to tell anybody back home what was going on. So the first person I ran to was the man that we invited to the house party. I called him crying after a fight, and I said, "Can you please meet me at GameStop?" And it was GameStop on base, because he lived in the barracks. And he said yes. So we met up. And this is where the humility, this is where God began to start humbling me and breaking me and pruning me. We met at the GameStop, and he got in my car, and for 2 hours we were in that vehicle. And it started out me telling him, "I invited you to my house because of this." And his face just looked so startled. He was like, "I would have never done that, even if you had asked me." And he started giving the benefit of the doubt to my husband, saying, "Maybe you guys need marriage counseling. Maybe he needs this, maybe this." And he was just giving me such good advice, and he was being so kind and so loving. And I felt like at that time, I had not felt this kind of kindness and love in a while. So I threw myself at him, and we ended up having intercourse that night. And after we were done, I just started crying, and he was really upset too. And he's like, I grew up Christian. I'm a Christian man. Like, what did we just do? And he instantly, I could see the fear on his face, because adultery is a big deal in the military. And, he said, "You can't tell anybody that this happened. This can never happen again." And, that's where guilt and shame really entered into my life, because now I'm this woman who committed adultery. And at the time I would say, well, I would have never done this if he didn't put this in my mind to begin with. So it's not how the world, that is normally how the world is blame shifting. Culture is huge. And thank God I'm out of that, because I look back now and I'm like, I still made the choice to drive to base. I still made the choice to let him in my car, and it's not okay. And I had told my best friend what had happened at the time, and she said, "You have to tell your husband, you have to tell him." And so I waited a few weeks, I nursed and rehearsed it over and over in my head. I was letting this guilt and shame build up, and then I let it build up. I still hadn't told my husband. She kept telling me these over the few weeks. Well, I was at work one night at Starbucks. We were closing. It was dead. And I was having some pregnancy symptoms. So I was Googling to see, the symptoms I was having. I was Googling to see what it could be. And it kept coming up as pregnancy. And so I was like, oh no. I went out into the PX. That's the little shopping. It's kind of like, how Target has a Starbucks in it?
Yeah.
So it's like that. It's a shopping center with a Starbucks in it. So I went out to the PX. I bought a pregnancy test. I went right to the bathroom, and immediately it said pregnant. And I just started crying. I was stuck in the bathroom for probably 30 minutes just crying. My coworker had to come and say, hey, are you okay? Like, are you coming back to work?
Yeah.
And I did not know what to do. I felt so sick to my stomach. I told them I need to leave work early. And immediately I called the other man who I'd met in the car. I'm trying to think of a name. I'm just going to use names because it's truth and it's real. And I don't know if they'll see this anyways.
Yeah.
But I hope that they do. If my ex-husband sees it, I just hope he understands that he's not the one. Maybe he'll watch it and say, he's not the only one to blame. So his name is Austin, my ex-husband. The other male's name is Zach. I called Zach and I explained to him, I said, I'm pregnant and it could be yours because I wasn't on birth control. And I had sex with my husband, but it was like nothing was happening until now you go out of your marriage. And this is why I always share with everybody, like, sexual sin is big. When you go out of your marriage, now I'm pregnant and, I don't know whose it is. It could be literally anyone. Like, that is fearful. And immediately Zach said, we need to have an abortion because if you have this baby and they do a blood test or paternity test and it comes back saying it's mine, I could lose all my benefits in the Marine Corps. I could get kicked out of the Marine Corps. And I used to be the woman who would guilt, shame, slander, ridicule any kind of woman who had an abortion. I thought it was disgusting. I thought it was sickening. I hated it. And then I hear the word and it's presented to me. And I feel like a lot of people think that it's just a woman's choice, that it should only be a woman's choice. But really, like, men do influence us. And if you don't have supportive men in your life when it comes to pregnancy, you are instilled with fear. So I immediately knew, okay, I need to get rid of this. And now I had just everything I had labeled them. Anytime we label anybody anything awful, it's God, you will. I mean, he didn't use it. I made a choice. But like, now I've labeled myself those same things. I saw myself as everything that I would see these women as. And I called my best friend to tell her, the one who was trying to tell me, you have to tell your husband that you cheated on him. I had to call her and tell her, Rachel, I'm pregnant. And she said, oh my gosh, like, you need to tell Austin. Like, even if you don't respect him as your husband, you need to respect him as a human being, and he has every right to know that you had an affair and that you're pregnant. Like, he has, give him the chance to decide. So I waited until the day after Thanksgiving because Rachel's husband came out and stayed with us. That was Austin's best friend too, childhood best friend. He came out and stayed with us for Thanksgiving. He was in the Navy, so he was only 2 hours away from us, where she was in Utah, so he couldn't go home for the holiday. And she said, it's probably better that you wait and tell Austin when my husband is there. For your safety, just because we know how angry Austin could have been.
And I can only imagine during this time, like, it's one thing to, in that moment, spontaneously say it, but you have like all this time where you're only and your friend, and it's building up. So I can only imagine that during this build up, but like waiting till after Thanksgiving, and you're trying to like, what was that like for you living in that time where you're trying to not hold it in, but like wait for that moment that you agree that you're going to say it. But also, like you said, now you've turned on yourself a little bit. Now you've turned against yourself a little bit for even considering what you were mentioning earlier, like when that's presented to you. So what was that like for you, like in that alone time? Because at this point, like you said, you don't have that support, that support from men, and then also you're not able to tell your family what's going on. So what was that like for you leading up to that day, as well as like just accepting that you're going to say?
It was a hard time because I was so afraid. One, afraid of what people were going to think of me. Two, I was afraid of divorce. You know, divorce itself, when you grow up in a very religious environment. I mean, I do honor marriage and I value marriage, but, you know, divorce just brings already so much guilt and shame. And I'm like, okay, he can
Mm,
leave me. This might lead to divorce. People are going to know that I'm pregnant from another man. And it's just like you start thinking the worst thoughts about yourself. And it is really scary. You don't know what to do. And it's like, because I did value life so much before, you know, I didn't want to have an abortion. No woman, I don't think any kind of woman who even says, oh, it's a sack of cells or it's a sack of tissue, like it doesn't matter, then why do you have to get rid of it? If it's just
mm,
a ball of cells or just tissue, then why not just leave it in there? You know what I'm saying?
yeah.
And because we know what's to come. And, you know, I didn't
Mm,
want to have an abortion. I was like, well, maybe, you know, I had all these thoughts like, what if I did just keep the baby? And I was just hoping, like, I hope it's just Austin's and not Zach's. Like, I
yeah.
had no idea. And just the unknown of, like, whose baby is this? Like, whose child am I holding? It just, it was very, I don't even know how to explain. There's no right words
Yeah.
to explain. It was very,
The reason I asked is because I imagine like you're not the only person who's probably lived in a place where I have this thing that I have to tell, but I don't know one, I don't know how. Like first when you were talking about the infidelity, like how do I even bring this up? And then it's kind of like you smack a cherry on top, and it's like that plus the result of that action maybe coming out to be being pregnant with someone else's child. Um I imagine that like I can see that people probably can relate to that in the sense of like, oh my goodness, like I'm currently in a spot where I'm struggling to come forward about something. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in those same topics, but I can imagine someone saying like, I'm really struggling with talking about this, or I feel alone in this area. And so I wanted to dive into that a little bit just so that people can see that like it's really easy to feel alone and I guess to batter ourselves versus realizing that God is with us. Because I think in the interview that I've had previously, she mentioned being in a hospital room and saying, like, where's God in any of this? Right. And sometimes we are so focused on our own actions and what we did um, and how we're alone in it that it can be so consuming in the end. It like really can consume you. So I just wanted to ask what that was like because I imagine like you're waiting for that. So but yeah, you were saying it was waiting until after Thanksgiving and your friend's husband was going to be there.
yes. And honestly, if you do want to dive more into the abortion topic too, like just ask me anything because I am an open book. And honestly, I think I need to be probed on this stuff because God, right now in my season, now that I have a desire to be a mother, my
Mm,
abortion is coming up. So I'm glad that we're able to talk. Like we're doing this interview, I think, just at the perfect timing because I just got a book about um, basically hope after abortion. And I just started a
mm,
Facebook page called Surrendering the Secret Hope After Abortion. So I can share my journey of healing.
wow.
Because I'm learning that there is a difference between forgiveness and healing. And I
Mm,
tasted when I was first saved, I tasted, you know, forgiveness. I tasted that
wow.
love from God of forgiveness to where I'm not feeling like He's not going to accept me because of what I
Mm,
did. But now I think because it was tucked away. I'm like, okay, I'm forgiven. And I truly felt in my heart like remorseful of it, you know, I'm forgiven.
yeah.
But now he's taking me finally on a season of healing. Now that I'm wanting to be a mom, because the
Mm,
enemy been attacking me, you know, you've had an abortion, Are you
Yeah.
sure you're going to be able to have a mom? Is your reproductive system good? Like so I'm glad this is coming up because I wish that I had somebody back then to speak to and share this with. Um, the first person I did tell was my mom. It wasn't even Austin, because when it came to tell him, we sat on the couch and he had already pulled out his phone and started recording me on camera because he knew. So I said, I need to tell you something. I need you to sit down. And because he had nursed and rehearsed in his mind and already convinced himself that I had cheated on him before I even did it, it was like he already knew what was coming.
Yeah.
And he was ready. He was ready to publicly humiliate me. And I sat him down on the couch with Rachel's husband there. And I said, I had an affair with Zach. And he lost it. He lost it. It was so scary that he was swinging at me, but he was hitting the wall and Warren between us. Warren was still in between us, and he was still this close to my face. He was spitting on me. He was labeling me and calling me every single thing in the book. And I was terrified. I didn't even get to the pregnancy part. It was so terrifying that Warren, when we had some time for a minute, because Austin had gone upstairs and he had started throwing my stuff out into the desert sand. We didn't have grass there, so throwing all my crap out into the sand. And while he was doing this, I was in my car crying. Like, Warren told me to go to my car, and he had looked me in the eyes and he said, what you did was wrong, but I feel more sorry for you than I do for Austin right now because of how he's handling this. Immediately when I was in the car, I called my mom, and she is in Utah. She was actually at Olive Garden with my grandparents having lunch with them. And I told her what was going on. I told her what I did, and she just started crying. And I said, Mom, I didn't even get to tell him the worst part. And she said, what is it? And I said, I'm pregnant. And I remember she just started crying, and she said, you cannot tell him. With what he is handling, the way he's handling it right now, I'm scared that if you tell him that part, he could hurt you. She thought that he would literally kill me. Because before we moved there, you hear, we heard a story, maybe 2 years prior to us moving there was a Marine who was just so angry at his wife for cheating on him. He threw her in one of the mines, out in the desert. So, and you just hear a lot of stories about Marines out there in 29 Palms doing that. And so she said, you cannot tell him. Don't even tell him. Just go to a friend's house and we'll be there tonight. And she left Olive Garden and she went home, just packed some toiletries, and they left and drove all the way to California to drive just to come and get me. They stayed there with him. And she said she was so afraid when she got there because she had sat down with Austin and he was crying. He was hurt. He was very angry. He was so angry that he had looked at her and said, I'm going to make your daughter's life a living hell. And that's what she remembers from that day, because she said his eyes were just so dark. She could feel the evil that's on him. And the next morning they took me and my dogs home that Monday, because this was, I think that year it was on a Saturday. I think Thanksgiving was on a Friday. But that Monday I called the Planned Parenthood and I made the appointment. And my mom could not go with me. She had work. So that was really hard for me because my mom at the time, she was my best friend. She was my go-to. And I'm so grateful that I got to tell her and she didn't, guilt or shame me.
Yeah.
And she was more so, I understand why you're making this choice, even though she didn't agree with it. It was good to have my mom, but she couldn't be there with me when I had it. My aunt, she was there for me. She was able to go. She didn't have to work. So when it did come time for the appointment, Zach, he encouraged the abortion, and he helped pay for it. He paid for most of it, honestly. But he would check on me. He called me the morning before I went in. He called me after. And he was as comforting as he could in such a, because he's not the one going through it. He's just more fearful of, this needs to happen.
Yeah.
So my aunt came with me that day, and my heart was already breaking before we walked in. when we went in there, when I went, they gave me some anxiety medicine, and then they still lay you down just to do an ultrasound to make sure that it is still there, that it is still alive. I was probably only 8 weeks, maybe, is what it was. And they don't show you the ultrasound, but you can still hear it. So I heard the heartbeat, and people don't think that like when people say it's just a ball of tissue, like, no, you have a heartbeat that early. Like, I heard it.
Wow.
So it was even harder hearing a heartbeat. And then from then on, the anxiety medicine started kicking in, and like, I will never like encourage abortion to anybody ever again, because that day is such a blur because of how much medicine they give you. But we went into the room, and I'm already crying. I was crying the whole day, and my aunt's crying, and she's holding my hand the whole time. And it's very traumatizing, especially when you have the surgical abortion.
Yeah.
You know, they don't really comfort you. I wasn't very comforted. They just I was just the next girl. I hopped on the table. The doctor didn't really, say hi or make me feel okay in any way. It was just like I was just it was just
like a transaction. Like,
yeah,
here's another one. Moving on.
yeah. And the pain, they have to numb you like 5 or 6 times. The needle this long goes all the way up, and they numb you, and that pain, it just starts feeling like birthing cramps is what they said. You're gonna feel birthing cramps, and they had to do that like 5 or 6 times. So I'm already wailing, and then they started to do the abortion, and it was loud. It sounds just like a loud, obnoxious vacuum, and they sucked it up. And I was looking at my aunt the whole time, just crying. Like, I was wailing because I'm like thinking in my head, like, what is going, like, why am I doing this? And I felt like I didn't have control, even though I was the one who walked into the building. It still feels like because Zach encouraged it, or because I was fearful of my husband finding out, or other people finding out, that I would rather just get rid of this before. Like, I just thought it was going to be tucked away. Nobody would know.
Yeah.
But now I tell everybody. But when it was done, they replay the ultrasound just to make sure, to see and make sure every part of it is out, and there was no more heartbeat. And I just started crying. And they had put the jar, like, they put it all in a jar, and the nurse had put it right there on the counter so I could see. And it just looked like, I'm not sure if you've seen the movie Unplanned.
I haven't. I remember when it came out.
That is a really good movie, because it really is, it's graphic to the point where it shows on the ultrasound that no matter how small they are in there. And it shows, when I first watched this, I obviously just cried the whole time, because I saw a glimpse of what the doctors see,
Yeah.
And it showed, the machine going up, and you can see the fetus kind of trying to run away because, it senses pain. I'm trying to get away, and you just see it on this movie. It gets sucked piece by piece. And so then when I watch that and I think back to my experience, they put it in a jar. It's hard to think that's what I did,
Yeah.
And then after, they just kind of put you in a waiting room till your medication kicks off. But I just remember laying there just shaking. I had the shakes. I wasn't feeling good. I felt like I just lost something.
Yeah.
Like, I once had, it's like, now that I know how precious, like, I understand how precious life is, and I look back, the feeling that I was feeling was, I can now look back and say, I had something so precious, and it was gone.
Yeah.
You just feel kind of like, I don't even have the words for it,
It
Like,
also makes me think about you lost that, but also a little bit of a piece of you also went because this entire time you had this strong belief of like, I'll never be that person, like I can't understand. And you go from that to doing it yourself to experiencing that. And so like you're going through an entire shift. Like you're challenged and you're exposed. And like you said, you feel like you have no control, but you also feel like you're not human because like you said, you felt like the doctor didn't acknowledge you. Your experience just felt so um disconnected, like you
yeah,
were in your body but also it was just everything was going on and you're crying. And so like it's so hard because you did lose, of course you lost that piece of yourself, but then there's so much that went with you. Because I imagine, and I'm fairly confident when I say this, I can only think that when you went home that day, you didn't go home, you know, joyful. You didn't go home feeling better than when you had a week ago or even like a month ago. Like something in you must have shifted
it's
along with
like I
that.
entered a prison.
Mm,
A lot of women who are pro-choice, a lot of men who are pro-choice, they think that they're vouching for freedom, for a woman's freedom of their reproductive system, but what they don't understand is they're actually preaching for a spiritual and mental prison.
yeah.
You don't get freedom when you make a choice like that. Um you enter a prison.
Mm,
And so yeah, it was very detrimental. Um it was hard having conversations with just my husband at that time because he was so manipulative, and I know that this manipulation comes because he grew up in a broken home, and I feel like narcissists, they're not evil people, they're really broken people. And the
yeah.
reason why they are so controlling and so manipulative is because they have experienced loss in their life. He lost both his parents when he was little. So I
Mm,
see him as that's the only way he understands how to keep people in his life is through
yeah.
manipulation and control. And
Yeah.
he said all the right words to me, and we had conversations, and we decided to work out our marriage. But it was like he wanted me to come home back to California right away, but I wasn't allowed to have sex for a certain amount of time because of my
Yeah.
abortion. That's what they told me. You have to wait. Like, I think I had to wait maybe 6 weeks. I don't remember fully. I don't remember.
Mm,
But it was going to be hard because this is my husband who sex is what determines love for him. The amount of
yeah.
sex you have shows me how much you love me. So I told him, I said, I need to wait and save up money till I can come back home, which wasn't like all the way true, but I needed to wait till I was healed down there.
Yeah.
And when I met with him and I finally went back to California, um, we started working on a marriage, and 2 months later he deployed. So I went back to Utah anyways during his
Yeah.
deployment. This was his first deployment. When he deployed, it was the manipulation and toxicity just it like amplified. Even though he was on the other side of the world, it was like he still had this control and power over me with his words. They were so strong. And
Mm,
before he had left for this deployment, I could not handle the secret anymore. So I lied to him and I said, I had an abortion, I was pregnant. I laid it all out for him and I said, but I'm pretty sure it was yours, is how I tried to soften the blow, even though I didn't know whose it was.
yeah.
But some way, somehow, I did convince him that it was his, and we had gotten matching tattoos for this baby.
Yeah.
And but still, I still had in my heart, I didn't know whose it was.
Yeah.
And I look back now and I'm like, that is also that's a giant lie.
Yeah.
No matter how awful he might have been to me, that's just as awful. Convincing somebody that this was their child, because even if it was his child and I told him I got rid of it, that's going to create, he
Yeah.
had no say. He had no, and everyone should have a say. But he did deploy, and on this deployment, now he's filled with anxiety because he knows that I'm capable of going outside of our marriage. And it's like, because I now know that I can, that summer of deployment, I'm not going to lie, I was going out to the bars, I was flirting with men. I liked the attention I was getting from them. even though my husband, like, I look back now and I'm like, you're so controlling. Like, why are you saying I'm cheating on you? I'm not. But I wasn't doing things that a married woman, you know,
Yeah.
should have been doing. I wasn't having sex with other men, but I definitely was not doing
Yeah. Honoring the
respecting.
marriage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was just torment, the whole deployment. And it ultimately was just, it got so bad that I ended up in a psych hospital. My mom had taken me to the ER. I had taken a bunch of pills, and it was hard when I like finally woke up in the ER and I saw my little sister, because my dad and my little sister came, and just seeing my little sister there looking at me like broke my heart, because I want to be an influence. I feel like I've always had this drive to influence people.
Yeah.
That's how I feel like, God did choose me,
Yeah.
that's how God makes you feel chosen. But seeing her there, I was like, oh, I thought I hit rock bottom there. No, it's like it just keeps going and going. But from the ER, they took me to the emergency hospital, up to the psych hospital, and I was there until my parents were able to get me out. But even when I was there, they have a password. So if you give your password to a family, they can call you and talk to you. I told my mom that she can give Austin my password, my husband. So he would call me and he would say, like, you should have gone through with it. You should have just killed yourself. You should have, it just wasn't. He abused
Yeah.
he
Code.
abused, yeah, the luxury
Like,
of
yeah.
having access to me. And
Yeah.
there I met a friend who I'm still friends on social media with to this day, but it was like God gave me a person when I was there who was also going through a hard relationship too. And I really connect. I think she got me through the time in the hospital. But I did eventually get out of the hospital. And then I went back to California, but on my own, maybe a month before he came home from deployment. And a month before he came home from deployment, I was going out to the bars there with my friends, and I had met up with a man, and my own husband knows about this other man, but I didn't fully tell him like the details. He doesn't really ask. Like, he's just like, well, that was in the past. My husband now he's very accepting and loving, and he's like, the past is the past. Like, whatever happened
Yeah.
before, but he might, I don't know how, I don't think I've told him this much in it, but there was
Yeah.
another man I knew in 29 Palms, and I invited him to come out to the bar, and I took him to my house that night, and I did it again.
Yeah.
Right before my husband came home from deployment. And, leading up, now that I'm talking about it, I'm really trying not to think about what other people are going to say when they're hearing this. But
Yeah.
even up until 2 years ago, when I started walking in my faith and things were happening again, and my ex-husband and all that stuff was coming back into my life, I was still trying to make him look like a bad guy to his old friends. And he's not. He's just we were both broken people and who made poor choices. But yeah, I invited this other man too right before my husband came home from deployment.
Yeah.
I didn't feel great about it. It was like I was turning to this other man to comfort, or just it was nice to have somebody who wanted me in a way where it wasn't control, or it was not good. So I did it again. So of course here I am with this big secret. I'm welcoming my husband home on deployment. Bring him home. Of course, that's the first thing he wants to do, and I can't stop like thinking about what I did. Like, sex was just not enjoyable, because now it's either I only like it when it's with somebody else, and that's all I think about. And so, we had a full-blown wedding maybe a couple months after he returned home, and we had decided. I didn't tell him about this other man. I've never told him about this other man. He still to this day doesn't know about this other man. So we planned a wedding. He returned maybe September of 2018. No, 2017. I don't remember. I'm not even. No, 2016. Okay, 2016. He returned home around September 2016, and that December is going to be our 2-year wedding anniversary. So we had a full blown wedding back home in Utah, And, you know, we just said, okay, this is our time. Let's just start fresh. Let's just lay it on the table. And it's like, if you know the Old Testament, like, you don't just keep, you can't just like, okay, we're starting over.
Yeah.
You know, like, sorry, I'm like correlating the Bible now because I'm thinking about it. Like, they always did rituals, you know, every
Yeah.
year to just try to have a fresh start. It's not like that.
Yeah.
So that's what we thought our wedding was. And we renewed our vows. But that night of our wedding, he said, I asked one of your bridesmaids, like, if she'd be down to have a threesome tonight. So let's have a threesome. And I was just like, we just renewed our vows. Why is this starting already? And so that was not a good night. We did not do that. It was either we did that or I let him do something else to me that I also didn't want to do. So I just let him do that. And maybe 4 months leading up to April of 2017. So the more that we had sex, the more he would make me say Zach's name, because now it was like he liked the idea that I did that. After he had at the time when he did find out, he did put it all over Facebook, and he tagged me, he tagged Zach, all of our family could see, everyone could see, it was all over, everything. And now this man, he just, you know, ruined my reputation. Well, I did it, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
My whole reputation was just like burnt crisp. And now he's getting a thrill of it, a high. He's like, oh, say his name, call me this name. And I wasn't feeling, it was just mentally, emotionally just deteriorating back and forth. And he kept on saying, if we have house parties and you like pass out drunk upstairs, I'm going to have one of my friends go up there and do whatever they want to so I can watch. And so I stopped enjoying house parties. I didn't want to drink or anything. I didn't want to do any of that because that's not what I wanted to have happen.
Yeah.
And this is really where it starts getting, where our marriage starts really ending. April of 2017, he started having an affair with another woman. And during this affair, I would constantly reach out to her. I even reached out to her mother once saying, leave him alone. Like, I told her, leave him alone. We're trying to work on our marriage. We can't do that when you're in the way. And I started to blame her and not him. But she would always say, we're not having an affair. Basically saying everything to make me feel like I'm being crazy now.
Yeah.
Her mom, I sent a long message saying, your daughter's a homewrecker. Like, she's having an affair with my husband. And her mom just screenshotted it and sent it to Austin. So I think back now and I'm like, I think Austin could have been telling them, you know, like, we are separated. I'm just crazy. The way that they were reacting, like whatever he was telling them, they were believing him over me.
Yeah.
And they really did think I was crazy. And he would constantly mess with my head and say, Courtney's willing to fight for a relationship with me. Why can't you? Because I would get to a point where I'm like, you know what, let's just get divorced. And then that's when he would play the head games and like, she's willing to fight for me. Why can't you fight for our marriage? And I'm just like, he was always going out to Palm Springs, which is probably an hour and a half away from 29 Palms, to go out to the bars. I would say, I want to go. And he would say, well, you work that night, because he would pick days when I was working at nights and wouldn't be able to go. He would have house parties and he would say, yeah, I said her name. So Courtney's going to be there. That's her name.
Yeah.
And he said, she's going to be there. Like, if you want to come meet her. But then anytime like an hour before the party, he would start a fight with me. And he would say, I don't even want you to come anymore. Like, there's no reason you should come. Like, I don't want to fight with you. I just want to enjoy my time. So I would stay home.
Yeah.
I never got to meet her. And I knew that they were doing things from April to August, is how long this affair was going on for, this disastrous of failing marriage. But so when this all was starting, my friends Ashley and Tony came into the picture. They were also Marine Corps wives. They were best friends. They grew up together. Their husbands were deployed, and they had come into my work a lot. They were Starbucks regulars, and they had invited me to come to one of their Bible studies because they just knew what was going on. My friend Hensley, she had gone.
Can I just take 1 second? And I want to just say, like, I have to give you so much credit because I know this wasn't easy. And like I acknowledge that there are two people to play a game. Like I acknowledge that in order to play a game, you've got to have two players. But I have got to tell you, like, girl, so much credit to you in the sense of just holding your head up. Honestly, at this point, like that's not easy to endure on neither side. And like you were mentioning about him, like he's also broke, and then a lot of the times we project outwardly our own beliefs. Like if we're doing it, I'm gonna believe you're doing it because I'm doing it, and so because I'm doing it, you must be doing it. Um, but man, like when you're broken, it's already hard enough to hold yourself together because you're broken. The latch is broken, everything's broken, you can't. And God is, God and the Holy Spirit, Jesus, they're what hold us together in those moments. But I have to just tell you how much I appreciate your openness, how much I appreciate your vulnerability. And I know like we're still moving forward, but like I just really want to thank you for all of that you've been sharing. And all the brokenness that you've endured, all of the pain that you've experienced, and just to see how you were still, because like I know that it's easy to be hard on ourselves and say like, well, I was still going out and doing these things and I wasn't honoring my marriage, but at the same time, it's like it's we've all heard that study of flowers. You talk pretty to one flower, that flower thrives, but when you talk down to another flower, that flower doesn't thrive. And it's very similar to you. It's like you could only do so much with what you had. And not necessarily saying that you're blameless, but like in the environment that you're in, you're going to bounce off of that environment. You're going to do like, and it's very similar to children. Children growing up. That's why it's so important on focusing what environment they're in and what they're seeing, because that's how they're going to react as well. And so, just again, so much love towards you, because even though you were dealing with so much, and you were really dealing with like mental and verbal abuse, and just even sexual abuse, and everything that you were dealing with, I just have to extend that over to you and just say like, wow, like you dealt with so much, in your own way, in a marriage. And of course, like you said, you're not innocent, you're not blameless, but it's difficult to live in that world and not be blameless when you're not Jesus. We all can't be mistreated like he was, and abused and rejected, and have that same grace. So I just want to extend that to you. And it makes me so happy to think that like when God, when Jesus took on that cross, I'm trying not to cry because it's just so beautiful to think about it. He thought about you in those situations. Like when he looked at that cross and when he endured everything, he said, I'm doing this for Candace. I'm doing this for my daughter. I'm doing this so that she can have that hope later, and have that freedom and that grace. So it's just again so beautiful to hear you, talk and be so open and vulnerable. Um, and just extend that hand to someone else, to be that person for someone else, to say like, I have failed in my own way, I have been broken, I have endured all of these things, I know what that's like. So I just wanted to say like, so so incredible to see where you've come from, and to see all the pain that you've experienced, and just to see how you've not only like endured that pain, but you recognize that pain and you acknowledge all of that. But yeah, you were saying you had two of your friends coming constantly to Starbucks and they became regulars.
Yeah, they were regulars. I also, they lived in my neighborhood, and we initially did meet. And thank you for that, by the way. Um, I always try to think like I need to tell how awful of a person I was, but I forget to. It was a lot. It was a crazy time. I would exhaust myself too, trying to spy on him, go through his phone.
Mm,
It's exhausting when you're anyone who's going through a marriage that's just full of lies and cheating, and it is
yeah.
exhausting playing the detective game. And it was
Mm,
so this is to the extent I had my friend Rachel, they were stationed at Camp Pendleton. I gave her my snap. I told Austin I was going out of town one time, and just to see what he would do.
yeah.
And I gave her my Snapchat information. I said, when you go to the beach tomorrow, I need you to log into my Snapchat, take a picture of the beach, and swipe so it shows Camp Pendleton, because
Yeah.
location. Like, so I was like, I need him to think I'm out of town. It was to this extent. Like I was doing
Yeah.
all of these
You were
things.
plotting.
Yes, and I didn't leave town.
Mm.
And he had stopped sharing his location with me on his phone, but little did he know I had gone through T-Mobile services, and they had a feature that you could add to your monthly phone bill where they would be able to tell you the location. So I
Yeah.
called him to see what he was doing. He said he was in the barracks, and I said, "No, like, you're lying to me. Why are you in Palm Springs?" Because that's where
Yeah.
Courtney had lived. And so it was like I would just catch him in
Yeah.
all of these lies, but then some way,
Yeah.
somehow he would manipulate his way out of it. Like, why are you doing this? But it's just
Yeah. Yeah.
it was exhausting. But yeah, Ashley and Tony, they came into my life. It's like when you really are searching for God, and I share this because I volunteer for my youth group. So this is just an example. And I know some of them are going to listen to this because, they watch everything that we do when we're an influence in their life. They do. So, hi, I love you guys.
Wow.
But I always just share, like, their relationship with Christ. Like, I always want to be an influence and lead them to Christ the best that I can. But really, nobody finds God until they have hit truly rock bottom, because that's when he comes. You have to literally see the world. You have to be so broken. Like, a burden has to be so heavy on your heart that you have nothing left to do but call upon God, call upon Jesus, because you hear all about him all the time. Whether people believe or not, he is
Yeah.
always a topic, no matter where you're at. And it's like there has to be something. And that's when you start asking. And that's when I started asking. And after I began asking, like, I need help, I would just cry in the shower. I remember I had a friend, my best friend, Chris. He has been my best friend since 10th grade. He came to stay with me in Austin at our home one weekend, and he was just downstairs, and I was just wailing up in the shower because of the argument Austin and I had on the phone once. And I did not sleep with this guy.
Yeah.
He is my best. He's like a brother. I just want to make that known, everybody. Since there is a theme going on here, he was not one of them. But yeah, he saw it too. And so I started calling upon God, like, God, like, I need help. And sometimes people who even don't believe, we just say his name, like, God, help me,
Yeah.
And I started doing that, and he started moving, because Ashley and Tony, they started to invite me to their Bible study that they were having at their house. And when I first had the invite, I was like, Bible study? I don't want to go to church.
Yeah.
And just how I grew up, I was not a fan of it. I obviously at this point felt, so I'm like, I can't go to church,
Yeah.
like, I'm this awful person. I can't go to that.
Yeah.
And they said, no, it's at our house. And so I was like, okay, I'm coming to your Bible study. And it was every Monday night. And, they started teaching me about Jesus. They started in Genesis, I remember.
Wow.
But the way they started talking about Jesus, and God, and correlating, we're going through Genesis, and they were already bringing in the New Testament, just showing how it's all correlated. And they were just talking about God. And then I was starting to see it in a new light, because it was completely different than how I grew up. I grew up Mormon, and they don't believe in the same Jesus as I believe in now. They believe that Jesus and the devil were brothers. So I'm like, that's something the devil would want to say. But I don't want to knock, like, any religion, because that obviously played a part of my upbringing, so that I can see a difference. But
Yeah.
I started learning about Jesus, and one of their Bible studies, they were like, we're going to watch a movie. It's called War Room. Have you heard of that movie?
Oh, I love that movie.
Me
I
too.
bought that movie off of Amazon Prime because I kept renting it to the point
Yeah.
where, like, my boyfriend was like, "Why don't you just buy it because of how much you love to watch it?" And I was like, "That's a great point." No, wow. And War Room especially is about a failing marriage. It's
Yeah.
about, oh my
And so I
gosh.
felt like they played it on purpose.
Wow. What was it like though watching that
like,
movie?
I'm like watching, I'm like, I see what you guys are doing. But
Mm.
it was necessary, because watching that movie, it really sparked my faith. I went home. I didn't have a walk-in closet like the movie. And if you haven't seen the movie, to those watching, it's it's really good. It's about the power of prayer, and it is about a failing marriage. And of course, this woman goes in her walk-in closet. She starts hanging up her prayers, and God saves her marriage. So I watched this. And I'm like, I need to do that. I literally need to do this because God's going to save my marriage. So I went home. I didn't have a walk-in closet, but I had a wall, my bedroom wall. And I started hanging up my prayers, like begging God, please save my marriage. Please help us. Please soften Austin's heart. Please, like, lead him to come into these studies with me. And he probably came one time, but he thought it was just a joke. But after we left, he just kind of mocked it. So I'm sitting there probably for a month or two, just writing out prayers. I didn't do it every day, but almost every day, you know, and I was just putting them all over my bedroom wall. And my marriage just kept getting worse. And so I was like mad. Maybe I was mad at God, but I was just like, dude, what the heck? Like, I watched this movie. Like, if you're that good, why can't you do this for my marriage? So then I started praying, God, if this isn't meant to be, please, like, give me permission. Like, I just needed, you know, I need to know, like, if it's okay for me to have a divorce, please help me get out of this marriage and give me the courage and the confidence. Because anytime I would bring up divorce or the papers, you know, Austin would manipulate his way out of it or talk me out of going and getting those papers. And so I was praying, God, give me that confidence and courage to leave this marriage and not feel guilty about it. And one day, please send me a man who's going to love me and honor me the way that I deserve. And please one day send me a man who's going to love you and who's going to lead me closer to you. And I probably prayed that, you know, a couple times. And before I went on base, and I finally went to their divorce class, because you just sit there for like an hour and then they give you the divorce papers, especially if you don't have any, like we never owned a house together, or if it's just going to be a simple, easy divorce. So I left that class with the divorce papers and I went straight to where Austin was at, and he had been staying at our friend's house. And we were used to like walking in to like our friend's house. It was a single Marine. He had kids, so that's why he had base housing, but he never really had his kids. So he wasn't there either. But me and Austin had gotten in a fight the night prior, and that's really what made me want to go to this class the next morning. And I got the divorce papers and I went to take it to where Austin was. And I went with my friend, my best friend at the time, because I couldn't technically serve him. I had to have somebody else. So I brought her. I was like, give him these when we get there. But we walk in and, you know, I see girly sandals. I see the bag, and I'm like, she's here right now. And, you know, this is where I learned, like, it's really important who you surround yourself with. People who are going to entertain this. And I'm not saying that she was a bad friend at the time. She was the best friend that I could have had in that moment. And we're young, so, you know, we know the outcomes if you catch somebody committing adultery. And that's where her mind was at, was like, let's catch him and get him in trouble. Where I look back now and I'm like, I wish I had a friend well, I don't really wish anything anymore because it led me to Christ. But, you know, for those who are listening who might be in this, don't go into the house, leave and save yourself other troubles. Like my pastor once said, there's not enough mistakes in this world for you to make them all on your own. So listen and learn from others. Like go the other way. Control your emotions. Just send yourself. But anyways, I went into the house. I went to the bedroom where they were. They weren't doing it. It was still early in the morning, but they were laying there in bed. She's basically in his t-shirt. He's basically just in his underwear, and like this man doesn't just have sleepovers for fun. Like, I woke them up by pulling her hair. And then he stood up, he's defending her, making me seem like I'm the crazy one. Like he wanted this divorce all along. You know, he was saying everything that she would want to hear and see. And then he tried to tell me that they didn't have sex. And I used to sell pure romance. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's like the girl parties, toys, lingerie, body stuff.
I've never heard of it.
Yeah, I used to sell that stuff because I'm like, oh, Marine Corps wives are everywhere. They're going to be the best people held to. So I would host these
Yeah.
like girls' nights
Yeah.
and just on a show. And it comes with a kit. It's kind of like women who sell Scentsy. They get like a kit to display for their parties, you know?
Yeah.
So I have my own kit, but things were going missing from that kit for over the leading up to this moment.
Yeah.
He's telling me that they didn't even have sex. I looked and I saw some of my stuff that was there.
Yeah.
And so I smacked him across the face, and that's really what triggered him. And he just pushed me back by my throat into the wall. He was mad. And I went to jail this day because pulled her hair, and that's battery assault in California, which is a felony. And I smacked him with an open palm. But I look back now and I'm like, God's grace was all over that because I never got convicted. I have been flooded by friends and family with character statements that I got to present to the judge. Even my ex-husband, I convinced him, I think he was fearful of divorce too. Of course, he doesn't like that feeling of losing somebody, but he wanted to gain another person at the same time. Can't have both of us, you know? But he did. He made it seem like he wanted to keep our marriage, and he even sent in a character statement. But basically, when I went to jail that night, this is where it gets kind of crazy. I was there probably for 9 hours, and my now husband, Corey, he bailed me out of jail. And everyone's always like, how did that happen? So
I was going to say, did you already know Corey at the time?
Yeah, I did. So he probably came, I just knew him from the gym, and then he was also a regular at Starbucks because he worked on base as a contractor. He used to be a Marine, but at this time in my life, he was already out and he's contracting, and he worked at the gym that I would always go to with my friend off base. So I just like knew of him. We weren't really close or anything, but probably 2 to 3 weeks before this jail incident, because their affair, I went to jail at the beginning of August, probably August 4th. I feel like it was either August 4th or August 6th. I don't really remember. I know it's one of those two. But Austin had started talking to Courtney about April. So this was like a long summer. And probably 3 weeks before this jail incident, well, not 3 weeks. Let me rewind. Corey had invited me to go with him to Vegas because he knew what was going on. He saw me struggling at the gym once, and I just like kind of told him everything. And so he knew what was going on. And to him, he was just coming out of a divorce that year, the beginning of the year. So he was like, sorry, babe, if you're watching this, because he's going to watch it. I'm not trying to look bad, but he was like just ready to take He's gonna be so embarrassed, but I gotta be real, okay? This is real life.
Yeah.
And he's hooking up with everybody. I'm just gonna put it out there. And so he invited me to Vegas, and I declined because I'm like, I can't go to Vegas with like some random guy and his friends. So I went to I declined and I didn't go. But when he came back, and my marriage is just getting worse and worse and worse, and I was giving up on the prayers, I started inviting him to go with me to the bars in town. I had gone to his house, and that's when I did it again, We probably, had sex a couple times before this moment, but it was like, now you're in this battle of like getting even, but then you want to save this marriage, but then you're still getting even because you're so angry. It's like you're trying so much that now you're just angry, and I was angry. And then I started wanting my cake and to eat it too. Like it was just a big game. I look back and it was a mess. It was a mess. It was a game. Right. Corey bailed me out of jail. And when it comes to getting bailed out of jail, like that's a whole new experience. It's like you pay 20% of your bail. My bail I was only worth $20,000. So he had to pay like $2,000 to get me out. And if you don't make it to your first court date, you got to pay the full amount back. So he's like, just make it to your first court date. But he bailed me out of jail. I went home with him that night because I'm like, my savior,
Yeah.
You saved me. So I went home with him that night. And it was, to me, I look back and I'm like, it was so romantic. It was like pouring rain. My knight in shining armor came. It's bad. But I went home with him that night because the power was out. When you have a flood, like when there's a rainstorm in the desert, it floods and everything goes out. But then the next morning, he explained to me, like, I have access to, like, call the chain of commands. Like, he knows he has those connections. So he said, I can call his chain of command, and like, they will walk Austin down from the barracks and make him sign the divorce papers. And I was like, really? And he said, yeah. So he did that. We went to the barracks, and he went over there with me to Austin and then his higher up, and his higher up made him sign the divorce papers, and we left. And I still remember Austin, when we're walking away, he's like, I'm always gonna love you. And I'm just like,
Yeah.
and I'm just like so annoyed. But then Corey drove me to the courthouse. We processed my divorce papers. They said it'll be 6 months until it goes all the way through. That's just in case you change your mind. And I'm thinking, like, I'm not going to change my mind.
Yeah.
That 6 months was another tormenting period, because Austin was aware of the 6-month period. And so he continued to try to guilt me, and like, he would say all the right things. And I just want to say too, my husband, Corey, like, at the time, he was very patient during this. And I remember him telling me, like, if, like, I understand, like, you're going to have these feelings because he was your husband. And he was just very understanding of that, because, you know, he's trying to be with me, but also, you know, I'm leaving one relationship and going right into another one. We were going to only be hookup buddies until I went back to Utah. I was just staying in California until my first court date, which wasn't until October.
Yeah.
But I ended up moving in with Corey because during the 6-month period, I technically was supposed to still be able to live in the base housing, but Austin went to his chain of command and said that I was talking to this man, and some way, somehow, he got me booted out of the base housing.
Yeah.
And so I had nowhere to go. Corey let me move in with him and his ex-girlfriend. It was a crazy time, but that's who I stayed with. Like, Corey was doing everything to take care of me. And, you know, it was like I look back now, he was showing me, like, what a real man should be like. And he said that to me the day after we took my divorce papers. He said, okay, can I take you to lunch and show you how a real man should treat you? And I was like, oh my gosh, you know, I'm swooning over this.
Yeah.
But he, from the moment, like, this was all going on and Austin would upset me during this whole process, Corey just kept saying, like, we're a team. And he was treating me like we were a team before we were really, like, committed to each other. And, you know, it was hard because Austin would still try to say the right things to me, and I really had to let that go. Like, anyone who, I try to tell this to other women when I'm doing their lashes, I'm like, you have to let it go. Like, you just, it's so hard because there's such a strong soul tie on that just trying to even, like, I would block his number, but then I would unblock it. And poor Corey had to change my number several times. Because other people, like, he would get my phone number. I probably texted him once from it because, you know, he would even use my dog to try to say, well, I miss Millie. Like, I need to come see her. And he would just say those things, you know, and it's just such a strong soul tie that it was hard to let it go. But it came to a realization, you know, maybe 3 months into it. I'm like, Corey is literally housing me. He's taking care of me. He's spoiling me. He's showing me a new love. Like, I need to respect this man more and let this go. I know it's hard because, like, I just spent all these other years with Austin, but you have to realize I can't be doing what Austin was doing to me with Courtney. Can't be doing this to Corey. And Corey he would get frustrated at times too. He'd say, stop texting him. You need to just stop texting him. Stop responding. But it's so hard. Like, no one talks about how hard it really is. Like, they have such a grip on you that it's like when you're with a narcissistic person, it's like, that's an addiction because you get bombed. And then you're reminded, like, oh my gosh, like, this is awful. But then you're love bombed again. So it's like a constant. Yeah. And it wasn't until finally the divorce finalized. And even when the divorce finalized, you know, I had a D-Day gathering at one of our favorite bars, and he saw that and he's like, I would never have a divorce day party. Like, I'm so sad that we're actually divorced. But during this whole 6 months, he also announced their pregnancy. So him and
Oh
Courtney
my
had
goodness.
pregnant. They had probably announced it like a month after we even signed our divorce papers. So,
Mm,
and then they had gotten married, obviously, really fast too. As soon as our divorce finalized, they got married.
yeah.
And so I really had to let it go.
Yeah. Oh
We
yeah.
had bills together still too. And so I want to also go back. So when me and Corey started dating too, I'd invited him to come with me to church because I eventually started going to the same church Ashley and Tony was going to.
Mm-hmm.
And we started dating. Ashley and Tony actually moved back to where they were from. Their husbands had come home from deployment and they got out of the Marine
Yeah.
Corps and they all went back home. So Corey came with me to church. He looked very uncomfortable while we were there. I asked him if he wanted to leave, so we left early and he took me to lunch and he just, was honest with me. He said, I don't believe in this stuff. He said, just Christianity. He basically, it's really hard because I know he's going to listen to this and he's going to get mad he's going to say, you put words in my mouth, but he literally did not believe in Christianity. Wasn't like, I still say he was atheist because he told me that he would convince his Christian friends out of believing,
Yeah.
So for me, that's kind of atheist. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. Just, you're trying to convince people out of the belief of Christ. To me, that's atheist. But I said, basically, well, what do you believe? And he started telling me about The Secret, the law of attraction, the universe, the power of the universe. What you put in is what you get. And you can basically, you manifest. He had me watch the movie The Secret. And it's all about manifestation, and making your vision boards. And
Yeah.
so I was like, oh, this sounds good. And then I started thinking, oh, God and the universe are the same thing.
Yeah.
I became one of them. And so, so I got myself a journal and I started manifesting. I got into saging. I had bought like a chakra and crystal book. I thought about those, but he didn't believe. And it wasn't until we had a Friendsgiving a couple years later. We had a Friendsgiving. One of our friends had brought a thing of pot brownies for it. And he explained how much you should only eat, where Corey thought he's buff, so maybe he could handle more, so he ate more because it wasn't kicking in after an hour.
Yeah.
So he ate another one.
Oof.
And anybody who's had that, that's
Double
not
effect.
how edibles work.
No, yeah.
That's kind of like the beginning of Corey's testimony, so I won't share like too much. And he makes it sounds way better when it comes from the source, but basically he was hallucinating for over 24 hours on this pot brownie, and he puts it as he was in hell this whole time. And it wasn't until there was a light that came and said, I'm real, I'm Jesus, and if you accept me, I can make this all go away. And he accepted him. But even though like that initial acceptance, it's like you don't really just start going to church. Not everybody does that because we didn't do it. We actually ended up moving to Bakersfield, California because he got a job in the oil field instead. So we moved over there. And, I'm still all about spreading positivity and manifesting. But I was closer to LA. So if you know like the LA mentality, it's like influencer, everything. And I started getting into the modeling. I was posting pictures on my Instagram. I made a whole separate Instagram page. It was my modeling Instagram page where I was basically showing myself to the world for free. I was doing these modeling shoots, and Corey was encouraging it too. And he was supportive of it. And I would post these photos and just say like, whoever like has something to say about it, like I'm confident. And it led me to wanting to get like my breasts done. So I did get those done. And it's stemming from a lack of confidence, it wasn't. And I look back now and I'm like, it's because I wanted to show people, like, especially my ex-husband, that's a factor. Like I wanted to show him what he lost because he would always put me down, flat chest. He would always, just, you get so insecure
Yeah.
through
Yeah.
all of this. Um,
Also, because in a marriage, you're supposed to like love one another, and when your husband, has been cheating and all of these things, and he does comparisons or he talks down to you, it's so easy to pick yourself apart, but then say, "Oh, well, maybe I can do all of these other things to make myself desirable."
yeah. And I thought that it was confidence, look at me, I'm in this happy relationship now. I'm so confident, and I was just turning to the
Mm,
world to get, validation and
yeah.
praise. And I remember too, it hit me like one day, one of my friends had asked me, like, can you block my husband from seeing this Instagram?
Mm,
And I just felt kind of bad, but I was like, sure, I just kept going. But I look back and I'm like, oh my goodness, like, wow. And
yeah.
so that was not confidence. It wasn't. It was just another way that it was just from one addiction to another, seeking
Mm,
validation from the world
yeah.
and getting that next high, you know?
Wow.
And so, um, during this time though, is when it was like 2020, COVID had hit.
Mm,
And
girl.
the oil field, and this is really where God starts coming back. So Corey had his vision in December or no, Thanksgiving of 2018. Then a whole year goes by. And we tried to go to a church once in Bakersfield. He wasn't having it.
Mm,
We
yeah.
didn't go back. His dad had sent him a Bible, and but nothing really came about it until
Mm.
COVID. And I feel like God moved a lot during COVID.
Oh, girl, God did so much in COVID. I absolutely
He
agree.
did. I
Yeah.
feel like he brought a lot of people to light during that year of darkness. Like a lot.
Mm.
Because a lot of the time when I'm sharing my testimony, girls will say, yeah, at the end of 2020 or in 2021, I'm like, God touched so many hearts during this time.
Oh, yeah. Even I can agree on myself. Like, I feel like in that time, I was when I started reading my Bible more, was when I started to seek God out more. So it's
Yeah.
beautiful that you say that because, like, at that time, the whole world is panicking, but also God was moving in
Yeah,
such a strong way. Yeah. Wow.
he did. And so when Corey was in the oil field, oil plummeted, and I was like, well, we can't sit and wait around. Like, we can't afford to just sit and wait around to see if it comes back up. California, we had California rent to
Yeah,
pay.
girl.
So I said, my parents said we can move back to Utah and move in with them in their basement. And so we did that. And of course, we lost everything. And it was another kind of thing that God had to prune me of and prune
Mm,
him of, because now I have this man who's making the oil field money. I have all this attention. I'm becoming an influencer. I have all these followers on my Instagram. I'm like making myself feel like I'm this important person,
yeah.
Just
You're on a
lost.
pedestal.
Yes. And we lost it just like that. And I remember
Wow.
just crying the second we got to my parents' basement, because it's like an unfinished basement. So we didn't have
So
walls.
humbling.
Yeah. And I'm like, what the heck? We just had everything. We were blowing
Mm,
our money on like things that, like, just things, because we
yeah.
had the money to do it. And so I felt so bad. Like, I remember, I think I've told my husband this, but I told him when we were in the basement, I was like, I just, I feel like the things, I don't remember actually what I said, but I feel like the things that I did say probably filled him with so much guilt, as a man,
Mm, yeah.
because I was like, poor me, we just lost we didn't lose anything. We have a house to still live in. Like, I was
Yeah.
feeling so ungrateful in that moment, because it's
Yeah.
like when you get yourself up to there
Yeah.
and then you lose it, it's like God can, I mean, he didn't take it
Oh,
away, but like, it's like you're going to be
God.
humble.
I
He's
love
going
how
to
you
teach you
said
the lesson.
pruning. Like God will humble you in the sense of like you were on this pedestal that you placed yourself on and you were growing and all this stuff and like but at the same time you wanted like inside you wanted a relationship with God and God was like
Yeah.
I have to like refine and also like I think what he does is he shifts our head and changes our perspective of what is what is kingdom and what is valuable and what is treasure, right? Because like what one person considers treasure, another person might not. And God's like definition of treasure is so different. So I actually interviewed someone, oh, he was in season 1. He talks about living in a basement and how that is where he heard God's audible voice. So like there is a theme where God meets you in those humbling spaces, because it seems like that's the only place we seem to be able to hear him when everything loud and distracting is gone. So it's just so amazing to hear you talk about that and talk about how like, you know, like how God not necessarily was trying to take things away, but how he was teaching you and trying to get to you. So wow.
Yeah, and he does come back in the basement because I do look back now, and I feel like my husband, I've heard him say it before, that like this whole moving back into my parents wasn't only for me, but it was also for my husband, because how's God supposed to teach Corey to depend on him as something that he can't see? If he's already just not belief of that, how is he supposed to teach him to depend on him if he can't even depend on what he can see?
Yeah.
And Corey's always been so independent growing up and taking care of himself and his loved ones. And so having to be dependent, it ate at his heart. Like pride ate at his heart. I started becoming like just very negative, and you know, our relationship started going turmoil. But it wasn't until after, so we got engaged. So we moved to my parents April of 2020. We got engaged July of 2020. And from then on, it just started getting turmoil that we were ready to call off our engagement by October. Why? The devil hates marriage. So the second we're engaged, he's going to come in hard to try to kill, steal, and destroy
that.
We were also very heavily into politics. Like maybe not so much him, but he was a huge Trump supporter, but I like idolized the man. I was like, as bold as I am about Jesus and my faith, I was bold about Trump. And now I realize we don't get involved in politics anymore, because the devil does use politics to divide, and we just don't want to partake in that division at all. So we're just not, and we don't do that anymore. But back then, that Trump was my Jesus. You know, he was he was going to save our world.
Yeah.
And it pulled people out of my life, my family, my loved ones, my siblings. You know, they started pulling away from me because they're LGBTQ community. So that was definitely, so I just kind of fell into a depression, and I was getting sad again, and I'm running out of hope again. And it was getting dark again. You know, I was like, I've felt this before. I don't want to be feeling this again. I don't want to be in a relationship like this again. I was starting to see, I was no longer seeing Corey as the man who saved me. I was seeing him as this mean, awful person, but I was also being very disrespectful, and I was also being an awful woman, and the love and respect that we're supposed to give each other wasn't there. And so we watched a movie called Social Dilemma. It talked about the negative sides like of social media. And as soon as I watched that, I was so angry with like the social media, like people, just whoever run these platforms, that I deleted every single social media permanently, except for except for Facebook. But I did take that off my phone and deactivate it. But Instagram, it was hard because I deleted the modeling Instagram, and I had so many followers, and I was so angry. I deleted my personal Instagram, deleted TikTok, permanently deleted everything else. And it was just what I needed, like to silence the noise, you know? And so of course, you know, I have nothing else to do in my free time but watch TV, because I don't have social media to scroll on. And so I'm looking on Amazon Prime, a movie to watch, and under the children and family section, the War Room movie was there. So I watch it, and I'm watching it, and I'm like, I've watched this movie. I remember this movie, and it ended, and I remember sitting there, and it re-sparked my faith again. And I'm thinking, what if God is real? What if, like, I'm not just watching this movie by coincidence? And I'm thinking, he is real. What if Corey is the man that I prayed for a couple years ago? And God just knew that his faith would come later because, in the movie, she's praying, and of course, the faith came later for her husband. And so what do? I start praying for Corey, for me, for our relationship. I tried to get him to do it, and he was not about it. So I kept my prayers secret. I kept putting them in a stash, like in this little safe that he had bought me, because I needed to save the receipts for this man. Because how else is he going to believe if I'm not showing him, look, I prayed for this and this and this, and this and this has happened.
That's
and
faith right there, because you're believing without seeing it yet.
Yes. And I just kept saying, well, I prayed it like this. I said, Lord, whatever your will is, like, if it is to save me and Corey, then please save us. Like, I don't want to go through this. And I just laid it all out to him. But one of the main parts that I always tell people, because it's the most important part of my prayer, and because I don't remember every single little detail, I still have some of the prayers up in my prayer closet right now hanging on my wall, just like how she has her answered prayers on a wall,
Yeah.
But the main part that I would always put in every single prayer, if we are meant to be together, then please save us. And if you can save us, I will give you my whole heart for the rest of my life, because that's the most important part. That's why my lash business is everything to do with God. That's why I'm so on fire, because I owe him, because he saved us.
Yeah.
Christmas that year was on a Friday, Christmas Day, and Christmas Eve, we had gotten in a big fight. He had been venting to another woman about our problems. And it was a woman who, on that Vegas trip he invited me to, he had invited her. Well, he didn't invite her, sorry. He met her in Vegas, but he invited her to fly out to him a couple months after they had met. And I had to tell him, like, no, if we're going to try to be together, she's got to go. So he had canceled her flight and she never came. But they tried to remain friends throughout, and it just bugged the crap out of me. But he would say, men are just like this. It's like, once that girl's done and over with, like, they really don't usually think about them in that way. He wanted to talk books with her. But then this, like, I just always felt threatened by her, no matter, even if it was an innocent thing, because of my past. And I had gone through his phone Christmas Eve, and I saw that he was venting to her about our problems. So I'd confronted him. We got in this huge fight, and I'd asked him, like, how would you feel if I left you? Because I wanted to hear, like, when I left Austin, it wasn't really that, like, I don't know. It just, it didn't seem like Austin valued me that much. So I was, like, really hoping Corey would say, like, feel upset if I left. But he said I would feel relieved. And that just, like, broke my heart. And I left Christmas Eve. I went to my mom's. I took my dog. And I went
this
to my
dog
mom.
has been everywhere with you.
I know. She has. Her name is Millie, and she was my baby. I actually got her the second we moved to 29 Palms. So she was literally with me through all of it.
She's seen everything.
Yeah. Sorry. She's passed away, so it's like I'm really thinking about
honor to Millie. Honor to Millie.
Yes. But she came with me to my mom's. I'm like, I'm taking my dog. Like, if I'm going, you don't get to keep my dog. Like, she's my dog, because he loved Millie. So I kind of And I'm at my mom's, and I'm telling her what's been going on, And oh, sorry, after I'd started praying in my mom's basement, I kind of skipped a part. God started moving, and when it was a hard time for everybody to get an apartment, he got us an apartment at the beginning of December.
Wow.
So we had moved in. I prayed over our apartment. I know, I'm sorry, I'm all over the place sometimes.
But no, definitely recommend praying over.
We had moved into our own apartment, and it was like everything I was praying and asking for, God was like, okay, here it is. And I'm like, yeah, we're meant to be together. I'm seeing it, but we were still fighting. And so I went to my mom's. I left our apartment and I went to my mom's. And even on the way there, I called my best friend at the time, and she was like filling my head with, like, do you really want to be with this man? Like, you need to leave him. Like, you don't deserve this. And, the devil speaks through people. He'll even speak through us sometimes. We don't even realize it. We have to be very diligent on what we say in words before we even leave our house. But
for real,
he used my mom to say, sweetie, do you really want to stay with him? And it's like, my parents are trying to comfort me Christmas Eve. And then it's kind of like they got muffled, and I'm thinking about God, and I'm just thinking about my life, and I'm like, I'm not going to quit. And I feel like God said to me that day, like, go back. So I went back to the apartment, and even Corey was like shocked that I was there again. And he had went to go to sleep in the bedroom. I made me a bed on the couch, and I just remember him coming out that night. And I think I've heard him share with a friend that God, that's like when God started softening his heart, because he came out to me that night and just leaned on the floor right next to me, just crying because I came back. And he was apologizing, and that's where I saw a glimpse of hope in us, you know. And then the next day was Christmas. We had a Christmas together, and then that night when we came home from spending Christmas Day, like evening at my mom's, we came home, and late that night I was searching churches in our area. And I would search in, I would click on one called New Creation Church. I loved it, and then I kept looking. But then I kept clicking on New Creation Church a couple of times, and I'm like, oh, I keep seeing this website. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to take it, like maybe this is the one.
Yeah.
I was thinking like, there's no way he's just going to come to church with me. So I'm going to submit inquiries to their small groups, because they had the option where you can just submit an inquiry to one of their small groups. So I did.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, they're not going to get back to me until the next business day. So I was like looking forward to Monday. Well, Saturday morning, Edna Hernandez calls me, and I always say her name because it just makes it so true. Like, and she's always praying for me. She's been rooting for us all the time. She's like one of my, we hardly ever talk, but I know that she always watches everything, and I always pray for her. She's praying. But she called me very early in the morning, and she said, I just want to, share some insight about the church and my story. I don't want you to feel pressured or anything. And so she was just very kind and loving and welcoming, and my people pleasing kicked in. So I was like, yeah, we'll be there. We'll be there at church tomorrow to meet you. We hung up the phone, and Corey's, I tell him we're going to church tomorrow. He's like, why did you tell her that? And I'm just like, I need to go meet this woman. So he said, well, I'm coming with you, but I'm not coming because I want to go. I'm coming to make sure it's not a cult, that you're not going to be suckered into this cult. And I need to make sure it's okay. So we're there. We go to service, and it's the pastor's wife speaking. And of course, she speaks about everything. Like, I had been begging Corey, like, just open your heart to God, just open it. And he was just not about it. But the pastor that day, his wife, she goes by Pastor Sharon, but she was talking about how God moves in your life little by little. And she was giving like an example of like the mailman. You don't just let him in your house right away. You'll like even like at a distance, but then there's the people where once you get to know them, you'll invite them over for coffee. But then there's your really close friends where you're like, oh, come over, like let's hang out all night, let's have a sleepover or whatever, just. And she correlated that to opening your heart more and more to God and inviting him in. And it was everything that we needed to hear that day. So Corey, I think he was kind of weirded out that she spoke about everything we needed to hear that day.
Yeah.
But he didn't come to church with me the next couple of Sundays. So that was pretty bummy. Like, I was really upset. So I pray with some of the older ladies at church, and they would just say, like, he's going to come. Just keep on hanging on to the faith. And so I did. And I saw an opportunity to really get him there. And they were going to be having, and this is 2021 now. So January 2021, I pretty much went to church by myself. And then February, I voluntold us for this couple's the EXO marriage conference. If you haven't heard of that, it's really good. And it was for married people, but I voluntold us to do the check-ins for this event. And so Corey's like, why would you do that? But I'm like, because we need to meet people, and we're doing this. So we did it. And we met people, and they gifted us free tickets for volunteering to do that. And it was exactly what we needed to hear regarding relationships. And we were the only unmarried couple at that conference. So at the end of the conference, Jimmy Evans, he's the pastor of he's the one who leads the whole EXO conference, but it was just like on TV, so they just played the conference online. But he had all the married people stand up, and he just walked them through like a marriage renewal, and we were the only ones who were sitting down. But just watching
Mm.
it just shifted the atmosphere for us because Courtney
Yeah.
started coming to church more. Our marriage, our relationship started getting better. So now I have to tell you
Mm.
these dates to kind of get this timeline because Austin and Courtney do come back in the picture. Um, so when we did start going to church, also they were doing a forgiveness series.
Mm.
They did this forgiveness event. It was not called a sozo. Sozo is more. Have you heard of sozos?
Mm-mm.
It's like a healing, a freedom ministry, but it's where it's for yourself. But it was like a group version of a sozo. I forgot the name of
Yeah.
it. But they did this like healing forgiveness night. It was, I don't even remember what it's called, but I went to that, and I start hearing about forgiveness and the freedom that you receive from it, and bless your enemies. And I'm like, at first I'm like, ugh, bless
Yeah.
your enemies, because Austin and Courtney, they got married, they had a couple kids together, and all throughout their marriage I would try to still warn her about the things he
Yeah.
was doing behind her back, because other people would tell me, and she would tell him. And I
Yeah.
get it, because I used to do the same thing where if I heard of something, I would tell him, and I would say, well, they told me, to try to make it feel like I have a backup, some backing me
Yeah.
up. So I think she would do that, like what Candace said. And he obviously would retaliate by going online and just posting these things. So I had
Mm.
given up on warning her. And so when I'm going through this forgiveness thing, I'm like thinking like, no, I don't want to pray for them. Why would I want God to bless them? Like they have no remorse for what they've done. I've never received any kind of apology. But then they really dove into the freedom. And,
Mm.
that put it in perspective. If you're asking God to bless them, you're not just, because it's cliche, oh, bless their hearts. No, you're asking God come into their life, change them, renew their minds, transform their hearts, and heal them. Because if they're healed, imagine how much better to society or to their families and their children would they be, you know,
Mm.
as far as people like themselves, how good they can be to their children and their marriage. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to bless them. And then also I wanted to be set free. I didn't want to keep feeling this hurt and anger,
Yeah.
and so from about January, like the end of January to June of 2021 is when I was praying for them and asking God to bless them. And then, so now I'm kind of got to give this timeline because it's going to get crazy. So
Mm.
around March and April is when Corey started applying for jobs outside of Utah. I think he was looking in Tennessee, Texas, but mostly here, Fort Bragg and Fayetteville,
Mm.
just because the market was better and we were wanting to not be in an apartment anymore. So
Yeah.
he was really interviewing for jobs out here, like over the phone or online and stuff like that. And he wasn't hearing anything back from anyone just yet. So I'm going to leave that as a cliffhanger for a second. That was like March and April. The end of April, we both got baptized together.
Mm.
In May, we got married. And then June comes along, and I had received a message from Courtney. Prior to this, her best friend actually tried to reach out to me, and I basically said, I don't want any part of this.
Yeah.
But then Courtney, she messages me a very long apology,
Mm.
basically saying that everything I had told her was true. It's true, and she's basically in my shoes that I was in uh,
Mm.
3 years prior, 4 years prior. And she's just saying, so sorry. And it was like, in that moment, as I'm
Wow.
reading it, my heart I had so much compassion for her. And
Yeah.
all I wanted to do was help her. The old Candace, without having, because this is now June, I've had 6 months of God just pouring
Wow.
into me at church,
Purifying.
groups. I'm getting in his word, and just, it was like he had softened my heart so much towards her that the old Candace normally would have read this message and been like, oh, F you, like, leave me alone. I've warned you. This is what you get. Do you not
Yeah.
remember this? And I would have thrown everything in her face. But no, I was quick to want to help her. And so I asked her to give me a call. We talked on the phone for probably 2 hours.
Wow.
And she was just explaining how the abuse had just gotten so much more, just worse. And
Yeah.
like it was to a point where he had held a gun to her head in front of their kids. And that devastated me because it's like these poor little babies.
Yeah.
And I'm listening to her, and she said that even financially, it got so bad that she had to enlist in the army just to keep a roof over her and the kids' head and keep a steady paycheck because he wasn't taking care of them like financially like he's supposed to. So I hear that, I'm like, okay, well, because she's from the West Coast, so I'm thinking like, okay, well, where are you stationed? It's got to be somewhere out here. She said Fort Bragg, North Carolina.
Wow.
And I was
Wow.
like,
Look at God.
you're kidding. You're lying. And she's like, no, we're out here on the East Coast and we're talking. I'm like, my husband has been interviewing and applying for jobs out there at Fort Bragg.
Wow.
Like, this is crazy. So I'm, we're thinking like, I think God's calling us to North Carolina.
Yeah.
Well, we're kind of connecting and I'm kind of helping her get through this because, anybody can just give you advice, but it's like she was willing to listen to me because I had gone through it too.
Yeah.
It wasn't the same when anybody else was pouring into her. And so a month or two goes by, and it was like the beginning of August. We just came home from our honeymoon because we had a late honeymoon. Well, 2 months late honeymoon. And this is where God started really showing up, not just for us, but for her. And I do want to preface that like nothing that I'm about to say next would have ever happened. Like I always tell everybody this, I was not good before God. Like we're awful without God. The only time we're good people is because of him. Like
Wow.
just what
Come
it
on.
is. And so she calls me one day crying, and she's very upset. And she said that Austin was out in Fort Bragg for their court date, and he had gone to her house. He basically demolished like everything, like ruined their clothes, like the kids' clothes and everything. But the most important part was he took her Jeep and drove it all the way back to Utah, leaving her and the kids with no means of transportation. And I'm thinking, like, what if an emergency happens and you can't get your kids to the hospital? I'm like thinking these things, telling me this. And so I say, okay, just like give us a little bit. Like we're gonna think of something. Just give it some time. So we hung up and ended that call. Well, way prior to this, during tax season, we had been blessed with a perfect amount to pay off my car finally. So we paid it off. And I was, coming out of that LA mentality, I always needed to have the new thing. I always needed the new car, the new phone, the new whatever was trending, I needed it. But second we paid off my car, Corey was like, we can afford another car payment. Like, let's get you a new car. And I just finally had a humbling thought, like, no, why don't we just wait? Let's just wait for the right time. Well, as soon as Corey said this and we hung up, I looked at Corey and I said, I think God wants me to give Courtney my car. And he said, I heard the same thing.
Wow.
And this would not have happened. Like a thought that good is not something that we do naturally in the flesh.
Yeah.
It is
Yeah.
something that's a calling from God, and it's up to us if we want to be that gracious
Person.
and do that. And I don't like making myself seem like I am on a pedestal. I don't ever want people to hear this part of my testimony and think like, oh my gosh, she is so, God gives us purpose in that way to say like, I was able to do this for somebody, and it does like make you feel good, but it's more so because of God. And it's to show God's love to Courtney, to her. And so we left that night, and it was so crazy. I was like, I have work the next morning. I don't know how we're going to do this. I have all these appointments, but it all got rescheduled. My boss was like, that's fine. You can go. Like, it was all so easy. It's like God made the way to leave that night. We left that night and drove all weekend to Fort Bragg. And sorry, my dog.
Oh, you're good. You're absolutely fine.
Everybody. So we drove that night. We arrived in Fayetteville Sunday midday because we left on a Friday night. We're driving there, and she was still surprised. She didn't know what to think. Because it's kind of a big, like, I always wonder, like, what was going on in her head, during all of this. How did she feel God's love? Did she feel, from my perspective, I don't think she felt, like, worthy of it. Because when you're where she was at, she kind of, sorry, they're mowing the lawn now.
You're absolutely fine. It makes me think of like the thing earlier of like who's now in your environment that you had left behind
Yeah.
before.
And it's like when you're in that environment, you don't really, you're so checked out that
Mm-hmm.
everything, all this stuff is just happening. And it's like, you can't even get a grapple on it.
Yeah.
But one thing I do remember is Austin had found out I was there, and he kept blowing up her phone. And I kept saying, Courtney, you do not have to answer this. We tried to go to lunch with her, and I could just see,
Yeah.
I was the same way. It's like your phone is your electronic leash. Like you
Yeah.
can't put it down. You're just so focused on like trying to respond to them because you know that. And I just watching it, and I'm just like, if only you knew, like the
Yeah.
freedom, And I remember he called her once, and the way that I talked to him, it wasn't mean or anything, but she was able to see how I was able to talk to him
Yeah.
and just explain, like, you don't have this power. Like, stop talking to her like this. Like, it's not okay.
Yeah.
And she saw that, and it was like, I know she got a glimpse of that courage and confidence too.
Wow.
And then I remember we had a moment in her bedroom where, I just prayed over her, and I just explained to her that what she did to me in the past, it had nothing to do with me at all. Like, she was being manipulated, she was being deceived. And, I explained to her that even when Jesus was on the cross, he still yelled out, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they're doing. She didn't know what she was doing. Whatever he was saying to her, like, she really, truly didn't understand what was really going on at that time. And I just let her know how much God loved her, or loves her, and Jesus. And I was able to talk to her about that stuff. So then we left, and on our flight home, and there's one more thing I do want to share how God blessed us during this too. So December 2020, when we got into our apartment, my husband finally put away his pride and applied for his disability with the VA. And I'm sharing this. I know I just know he's going to watch. So I always have to say this. Like, I'm sorry, babe. I know this is about our finances, but I'm sharing it because it was a blessing. And people, I'm not gatekeeping our blessings.
Yeah. And it could help someone out there too listening.
Yes. Well, the VA had said that everything was backed up because of COVID. So that he wouldn't get his disability rating for a little bit. Well, come July, like maybe a 2 week, or it was right before our honeymoon, sometime in July, he came bursting into our bedroom, waking me up in the morning, so happy. And he said, I finally got a word back from the VA. This is like 8 months later. And he said, I got full 100% rating, and they validated us for all of those months. They backed
Oh my
me.
goodness.
And I'd been praying too. I'd been praying for a financial blessing. Like, I don't want this debt. I don't want to go into more debt just to enjoy our honeymoon. Like, and when we came back from our honeymoon, we still had leftover finances from that blessing. And when we got to her house, we realized, like, this blessing isn't just for us. It's meant to share with others. And we were able to get the car tuned up and get new tires on it. We were able to get them some clothes. My husband had my ex-husband, sorry, he had, I guess, like soaked up, got like all of the kids' clothes like so wet. And when we got there, basically there was all these wet, spoiled clothes in the shower, like in the back, it's built up. And he had broken her washer and dryer too. So that was good. And so, we were able to use those funds to share and gift. And I took her shopping to get some of the kids' clothes. And we bought some stuff to help repair some holes in the house. So I really don't like sharing this part of my testimony because it sometimes makes me uncomfortable, because I really don't want people to listen to it and think like, oh my gosh, she's so good. Because that is, if I heard this story before I was a follower, I would think like, oh my gosh, she is like the nicest person ever. I don't want, I just want to reiterate or just say it again. Like, this is only because of God. Literally.
Wow.
Never used to be this nice. I was a get even kind of person. And so after this happened, we had to fly home. And so we were on our flight home and we had a layover in Denver, I believe. And Corey takes his phone off airplane mode and he says, I have a voicemail from Fayetteville. And I'm like, oh my gosh, play it. So he walks away, he plays it, and it's his job that he works for now, wanting to move forward with him. And I'm just like, this is God.
Wow.
That's where because I always explain to people too, when I'm sharing this, there are, Christians out there who have the deeds or they look the part, but their heart's not always in the right posture.
Yeah.
You can always do the things. Sometimes
you can talk about Jesus but not know him.
Yes, that. And so I always say, like, I think God knew that our act of doing that was a genuine act and it was obedient at that because, to just be like, spur of the moment, let's drive across the country and do this. Like, it was an act of obedience.
And also, this is someone who had wronged you in the past, and you, like, basically were doing what you just said, like, was something you didn't want to do, is forgive. Not necessarily forget, like forgive and actually begin that walk of freedom while still extending a hand of help. Because you can't tell me it's not God. If not only does God tell you, you need to forgive this person, but now I'm going to use you to help this person, the very same person that you were angry and bitter towards, that in the past you could have cared less what happened to them. That's a true character development spiritually, though. I always say, like, it's spiritual growth, and there's also spiritual pain growth, kind of like when you're little and your bones hurt because they're growing. Same thing, because you had to go through that healing process, but it's so beautiful. And no, I get it. This could have only happened through Jesus. Like, that's you taking up that example, not because you are this nice and kind person and selfless, but because you were going through your own journey doing this as well. Like, God was teaching you things that no amount of money could ever buy you.
Yeah, and it's like, too, I think during this time, all that I could remember from, that forgiveness series is I'm really bad with memorizing scripture, but when it talks about what reward is it when you love those who love you, like, because it does tell a story when you do love those who were once your enemy. And then the Bible also says, if your enemy needs a glass of water, give him something to drink. And that's what I thought of instantly when she told me about the car. It's like God reminded me of his word. Like, this is it. This is a glass of water.
Wow.
So, as soon as Corey had that call, I was like, God is honoring this. Like, we weren't doing anything to get something in return, but it was like God honored that. And he finally blessed us with an answer. And, we're like, okay, God's calling us to North Carolina. And what really solidified this was when we started house hunting. And, I go on Facebook, and the Marine Corps base is 2 hours from here, Fayetteville, the one in Jacksonville, the Marine Corps base in Jacksonville. Yeah. And so I'm like, okay, we might have friends out there that, people that we already know. So I post, I'm like, who out of all of our friends, like, live in North Carolina? Well, Ashley and Tony live in Autryville.
Wow.
That's 30 minutes from my house.
Wow. That's amazing.
The girls who invited me to their Bible study planted that seed. And now I'm like, look back and I'm like, I was so sad when they had to move. And I'm like, when your friends move in the military, you still kind of are really heartbroken because it just sucks. And I look back and I'm like, no, it was like God. It was like they were in California on a mission. I see it as this. They probably don't see it like this. But I see it as God took them to California on a mission. Their mission was to obviously plant seeds. But now I'm like, as soon as they left is when me and Corey started. And that was, they had to go because I needed to grow with Corey. Yeah. And so, of course, also moving here, like, Corey still was on the fence, kind of like he got baptized and, he was on faith, but he was still learning with God. But it wasn't until his job also was a blessing because our mentor, pretty much mostly his mentor, but I've leaned on him a lot too with things I've struggled with. But he has been the one to just be so patient and loving with my husband, because my husband will ask all the questions. He will want to debate all the things when it comes to the Bible, God's word. And
Yeah.
this man was exactly what he needed to teach him and pour into my husband. And then my husband just got involved right away with the church. Like,
Wow.
when we found our church that we go to now, it was like the second time he just started signing up for volunteering, and he made friends faster than I made friends. And I was getting like
Wow.
sad for a second, but he just dove right in. And he had started
Wow.
reading this book called Measure of a Man. It's a really good book. It's so good that he's like on his 4th or 5th time reading it with another group of men. He's been reading it with countless groups of men over and over because it's just that good. It's really good at helping men become the men that God created them to be. And he's found a best friend, and like just seeing my husband like just transform, because he used to be the type, he didn't want to work out with anybody. Now his friends are in my garage at 5 a.m. trying to work out, and I'm like, the guy who doesn't like working out with people is like working out with all these people.
Wow.
Or just is always so smiley, and he's a different person too. And
that's amazing.
Honestly, it's helpful now because I have like I'm getting closer with my friends at church, because that's the season I've been in. Is I'm ready just to really enjoy the peace and just dive deeper. But I don't really have a mentor who I really go to. But now that my husband, he is further along now in faith. I know it's not a race or anything, but he is now to where he can actually lead me. And he's kind of like my mentor. He can teach me. He can disciple me as his wife and lead our household. And
wow.
And I started my lash business. Before we moved here to North Carolina, our church back home, some of our friends would, pray over me or tell me that they saw me as this colorful rose, and she had a picture painted for me, and it was about rainbow of promises. She had typed something up for me, and then I had another friend saying that she saw me in a field with all these different colored flowers, and one of the verses on the colorful rose picture that my other friend had given me, she also not only typed up this snippet about the rainbow of promises, but she also gave me the verse, I think 2 Corinthians 2, verse 14 to 16, and it's about spreading the fragrance of Christ to so that was when we got to North Carolina. I was like, what am I going to do? I need to find work. And I had been banking, so I applied for a credit union here. I did all 3 interviews all the way. I went the first day of work, and I was just sick. Like, I was spiritually sickened, because I'm looking around. I see people upset about their account status. I'm thinking like, dang, I'm surrounded by debt right now. Like, anything in a bank, like, I know like a mortgage is like what we obviously need a mortgage in this world, or like a car is hard to, but it's like, I don't want to be in a building where like money is just, because money is the root of all evil. And I was just so sick, and I came home from work and I was like, I can't do this. And I've never done this before. I feel like my parents raised me to where I was very professional. But the next day I went in for my second day of work, and I went straight to the HR office, and I told her I needed to quit.
Oh my
and
goodness.
I remember her asking me, what are you going to do? And I was like, I think I'm going to do lashes. And I remember she Scott, like, she laughed.
Yeah.
Like, no, this isn't going to happen. So I ended up taking a lash course, and I started doing lashes, and I'm hearing about these women's lives. I mean, well, first they would ask me how I came to North Carolina since I just moved. I'd be like, oh yeah, I just moved here. They would ask, and I'd say, well, do you want the long story? Or do you want the short story? And so they're women. They want the long, juicy story. So I started sharing my testimony. And also, when I came to the realization that I was doing lashes, it made sense why people kept telling me they saw me in a field of flowers or surrounded by all these different colors. And then the verse about spreading the fragrance of Christ, I'm like, these flowers are women. Like, women who are still growing. And like, I could be a part of continuing to water. Like, maybe a seed's already planted, because a lot of women out here, a lot of my clients did grow up in church.
Yeah.
And it just probably wasn't being watered correctly. So
Wow.
I get to help water that seed and pour into these women, and they open up to me. And a lot of them before too, I had no idea how I was gonna say the heck, but how I was going to build a clientele.
Yeah.
I didn't know really anybody. And so I just started praying. I said, thank you, Lord, for the women you have lined up for me. I thank you for sending me women who need to feel and hear you and just see a different perspective and see light. And every single one of my clients so far who's opened up to me, there are still some who's kind of, quiet, but so far every woman who's opened up to me, they have gone through, even if it's something from like my childhood, they have gone through it, or most importantly, most of them, it's a similar situation of their marriage.
Wow.
Of a failing marriage. And so, or they're coming out of their marriage from failing, or they're coming out of a divorce. And it's just, the same kind of healing. Everyone's story is different, no story is the same, but it's pretty much along the same healing
Yeah.
path. And it just makes me realize, like, how cool is that? Like, you guys have no idea. Like, I've prayed for you guys, and it's like God's chosen you, because
Yeah.
if you're an answered prayer, then that means God has his hand on you. And it's like, I wish they could all just see this. And I feel like a lot of society too, for some of my clients, have kind of, I feel like Christianity too, I just realized, like, a lot of Christians don't take accountability, or they're not very transparent or about their faults. And it's like, you gotta be, if you really want to do the work of Jesus, you gotta be ready to just pour your guts out. Like you said, you shared this with me when we talked before this. You said, I can't get into other people's business without sharing my own. And that actually resonated with me this whole last week, because that is so true. And it makes sense. They open up after I've shared my story. They're kind of tense. I share my story, and then they're like, pouring out, And it is so, so, so true. Like, you just can't. And,
I mean, and it's beautiful what you're doing and what God is doing through you right now. And like everything that he's already done, and like wow, like I can't think of a better just an outcome, for you and your person. And like I love how God curates everything depending on how he made us. Like when he made us, he knew our humor, he knew our taste of style, our character, what we liked, our favorite ice cream flavor. He knew all of this before it happened. So then to think that he also was like, and I'm going to put them on this field and on this purpose because of what I know about them. And it's very beautiful. It's just a sweet sentiment that God is just so intentional with us. And so I have to ask, now that we're coming so close to an end, two things. One, with all of that you've said, what would you say like God has done with your pain? Like if you could just sum it up and explain like a small detail, like what has God done with all of that pain that you endured and experienced?
I think God has to use our pain to heal others. Because even through so after I started doing lashes, that wasn't an easy journey either. I had to go to beauty school. I got reported because you need to actually have a cosmetology or aesthetics license. And even through beauty school, I was persecuted too. And so God has to take all of our pain, every single circumstance in our life that is painful or hard, he will always use it to bring light. And whenever people are like, I just want to know what my purpose is with God, and I'm just like, it's not just one thing. Like, your purpose isn't just to be a dentist. Your purpose isn't just to do lashes. Your purpose isn't just your purpose. When people say, yeah, God's given me a purpose, your purpose is to serve him, to follow him, to spread the gospel. That is your purpose. And once you get that, once it just clicks for you, you have purpose in anything that you do. That is how you wake up with purpose. Like today, my purpose is to at least talk to somebody about Jesus. Once you get to that point in your faith, because I used to think oh, what does God want me to do? What is my purpose? It's not about what we're meant to do. It's about what he wants to do. And it's about us serving him and submitting to him and doing his work and speaking his word. And sharing his love and giving the grace. And that's how God gives people purpose. It's not just one thing, because God might be having me do lashes right now,
Mm,
but who knows what he's going to call me to do next. But the
mm.
purpose is always going to be the same,
Wow.
not
So
going to
good.
change.
Wow.
So
That is amazing.
I
Truly
hope that answers
amazing.
the question.
I think so. I think what it made me think of is from pain to purpose, kind of really just forging you from that pain, and like how it says in the Bible, like, God, or not in the Bible. There's a song, I might be incorrect, but there's a song called Paul and Silas, that it one of the lyrics is, oh no, I'm sorry. No, it's don't Give Up on Me by Brandon Lake. That's the one I'm thinking about. And there's a lyric in there that says, I'll, like, when you're in the fire, I'm in the flame with you. And
Yeah.
it's really, really beautiful because that's what God did. That's what he did with your pain. Like, he took your pain and then gave you so much purpose through it and just really walked you through all of that. And it's so, so beautiful. The second question I wanted to ask you was, where can people find you? So I really want to hit on that real quick before you jump off. For your lash tech, like your company, where can people find you if they're interested in getting their lashes done by you? If you have, like you talked about, that Facebook group that you created for women who have experienced abortions, and just like giving that a community. So like, even your TikTok, is there anything you want to share before you hop off, where people can, follow you, get more of you, reach out to you, anything like that?
Yeah. So my business Instagram is Come Alive Lashes, all one word. Um, you can even, I personally don't let people I don't know on my personal Instagram, but you can always follow my business page. And once we do cross paths or talk back and forth, then I do have a Facebook page if they want to join it, called Surrendering the Secret Hope After Abortion.
Mm.
I do have a desire to be a mom now, so that's about to be another. God's going to work through this with me. And my business is located in Rayford. And I just always tell everybody, like, just don't make it weird. Like, ask me anything, because I do have girls who have booked with me to get their lashes done, and I could tell they're laying there because they want to ask me something, but sometimes they're just trying to be respectful and think that I don't want to just flat out ask her, you
Yeah.
know, about her personal life, but like, that's what we're for. And I always
Yeah.
encourage like my friends and people who do want to spread the gospel, like, everything you want is on the other side of fear. And if you're wanting to
Mm.
really follow Jesus and be bold about him, you got to practice. You got to do little tidbits.
Come
Like,
on.
I started by going live on Facebook and sharing my little daily testimonials, or like updating people of how God's moving in my life. And that kind of branches
Yeah.
me out, because you don't have to have the people in front of you. I started, going up to strangers, and you start practicing. If you goal is to pray over other people, you just start practicing by going up and asking strangers, like, "Can I pray for you?"
Mm.
And you'd be amazed. A lot of them usually, I've never had someone refuse prayer, but
Wow. Amazing. And it's so true. I think I heard my pastor say fear and faith are the same thing, believing in something you haven't seen yet. So it really is where you're going to put your energy towards, the fear or the faith. And I've got to say, faith is much more peaceful than fear. So,
mhm.
I mean, I just got to say, thank you so much for coming on and being so open and vulnerable, but also just so encouraging in everything that you've said. And like, everything you said had a meaning behind it, just how you dived into it, just how you talked about just how you wanted to make clear that like you were also struggling at that time, and you weren't trying to make this person seem like a horrible person. And that just everything, just the way you carried yourself throughout this entire interview has just been absolutely beautiful, and I'm so incredibly grateful to have had you on. And I'm also so excited to see um where you go and where God takes you, and just everywhere that this episode will reach. And hopefully people do reach out and know that they have someone that can absolutely relate to them. But yeah, I mean, I'm really proud of us. We've hit our time. It's like
Oh yeah,
10:56 and we hit it right
yeah.
on the nose. So look at God working with time and everything to make sure we got this interview in at the perfect amount of time that we needed to. Yeah, but I'm so incredibly grateful for having you on. Thank you so much.
Of course, thank you for having me. I really do hope that it touches at least one person's heart. I hope that
Yeah.
people do listen to this. I know it's lengthy, but I do hope, and I'm grateful for whoever does listen. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Until next time.
Until next time, hopefully with me and Stacy. That would be so fun.
Thank you so much for listening to What God Has Done With My Pain. If you are interested in helping me spread light and truth of what God can do with pain, go to givebutter.com/what God has done with my pain, so the podcast may continue to sustain future episodes. As always, a huge shout out to Lazuli for her song No Greater Love, which you can find on Spotify. And you can find Lazuli on Instagram at Lazuli PROJ. Swing by What Way This Way on Instagram to catch some behind the scenes snippets. Make sure to follow the podcast so you don't miss a single interview. Meantime, I would love to hear from you on social media or email. Until next time.